I think if we look at the word identity, then it triggers a lot of us in the sense that we have been told to understand it in so many different ways, whether it's through like the lens of politics, whether it's through the lens of, like filling in forms. There's so many different ways you can look at identity, but I think the most important thing to do is understand your own identity. And I think that's where I thought, let me speak about identity, because that's what sort of inspired me to crack on with Planet Parle and launch myself like in the digital space, because growing up, my identity was constantly being questioned or, being scrutinized or looked into. So I felt, one, what is my identity, or what are my identities? Because you can have loads of different identities. And pretty quickly, I realized that identity is so complex, and currently there's so much of a kind of trend to like represent different identities, but to do that, it's incredibly complex because everyone has an individual identity as well as a whole bunch of other identities. So I sort of got into identity from a really young age compared to a lot of people. I must have been 7 years old when I moved to Australia with my family, and that's where I first started feeling the sort of need to try and understand who am I and like what do we sort of stand for, because you start a new school in a new country. The first thing the teachers would ask, or the other students would ask, is, where are you from? Because the classroom is majority white. So obviously you look different, but the teachers have already introduced you as the new kid from the UK. So obviously I would explain that I'm from the UK. However, that would quickly turn into if you're from the UK, then how are you brown? Like, how are you Indian? In fact, it wasn't even brown out there. A lot of people thought I was black, which was completely confusing because obviously growing up in the UK for 7 years, I did understand the difference between black and Asian. And so at that young age, I was sort of like sort of arguing and sort of fighting to sort of say, no, I am from England. But then it was sort of like a blessing in disguise, because if I was being looked at as an Indian, it sort of became like, well, if you are Indian, what does it mean to be Indian? And that's when things got even more complex, because when I asked my parents, they're like, well, actually, we're not Indian, we're East African Indian. So now I had African in me as well, ironic, because the kids in school were calling me black. So I would go back to school the next day and be like, well, actually, I'm African as well. So now they just think I'm making everything up. Like, how is this guy born in the UK, looks like an Indian, but is actually a little bit African as well? Like, he's just sort of picking and choosing. So this was happening at the age of 7 or 8. So you can imagine how early on I was sort of battling to a good extent to try and explain to people who I am. And it was more of a thing because I wasn't white, so I didn't sort of fit in according to what I looked like. I think from a young age, I was exploring identity, and a lot of people, I feel, didn't have to do that because they didn't have that sort of uprooting from a young age. So from that age, I knew that identity was something really important, and that you are going to be questioned from time to time who you are, what you stand for, where you're from. And rather than it becoming a negative thing or something that you try and avoid or hide, why not sort of really try and learn more about where you're from, what you stand for, and then let it empower you? That was obviously the plan. However, the plans never go to plan. So we moved back from Australia to the UK when I was about 14, and initially I was really excited because I knew there were more South Asians here in the UK. So I felt like, oh my God, when I go back, things are just going to be so normal and fine because there's going to be loads of people like me. and I'll fit right in, whatever. But that wasn't the case. I came to school in year 9. I think halfway through year 9, I joined school, and it was so awkward as well. I was a complete late bloomer, so I looked much younger than all the kids as well. And now they thought I was an Australian, like an Aboriginal Australian. They were convinced that that because I'm from Australia, that was my race. I was an Aboriginal Australian. So again, I was deconstructing myself yet again. So there was no escaping for me. Now, what I've gone through is not what all South Asians go through, but I wanted to still use that sort of really tiring like rhetoric that I had to continuously like, explain myself, like what I went through, who I was, where I'm from, and kind of like do something with it. But even at uni, that was deconstructed further, because like when I was talking about identity, I'm an Asian, then the nuances of being Gujarati and Indian was sometimes sort of unheard of or not as understood as well, or understood and spoken about, but not sort of represented in the Asian scene, whether it was in music or in arts or, you know, popular culture, or if it was done so, it was sort of done so in like a comical way, but sort of like the same sort of thing again and again. And I always felt like, hold on a minute, we're way more than this. Because I came back from India sort of frustrated, like sort of like this Indian guy going out to India at the age of 23, 2 weeks I was solo. I was trying to learn more about my identity out there, and I'm like, oh my God, but I'm really not like this type of Indian either. And then I understood that it was sort of like a moment of discovery. I understood one of the most important things in my life, and that was my British Asian identity and what that means, and sort of deconstructed that further into being Gujarati, into being Hindu, into being from South London, like as far as that. And I sort of just got to work and started creating videos. And there's been moments in like my journey, like day to day, where I go down this route where I'm almost asked to represent young Gujaratis, and I sort of say that I couldn't possibly represent every single young Gujarati because my identity is so complex. I couldn't say that I represent what is typical of a Gujarati. I don't know what is typical, but what I did want to do is say that we should all be representing ourselves way more. So I should know your stories, whatever you are, not just if you're Gujarati, but we should all represent our identities far more, because it is that complex. It's not as simple as, oh, there's an Asian on TV, that's us done. I mean, 1/7 of the world is brown, so you couldn't possibly represent like an entire population like that. Our lack of concern into looking at identity will result in issues probably a little bit later, when it's really sort of like, like who are we again? Yeah. So I feel like now is the best time to do it, and I think it's incredibly easy now with the resources that we have to hand. Like a lot of the times we get into this blame game, like, oh, the generation above didn't, deconstruct this enough or didn't look into this enough. But I feel like their priority was much more around the ideas to provide and to polish the next generation and like make them as successful as we can with whatever means we can, for them to then go ahead and do this. I feel like if you are identifying yourself as South Asian, then it's a good thing, it's important, but we can't then make it the only thing. Especially here in the UK, I feel like not all of us can do that. A lot of people can, depending on, what they do for a living or what their, life ambitions are. But not everyone can do that. But I feel like it is important, especially now, because we are still under-repped. We are still misunderstood. So we do need to sort of tap into our South Asian identity. I would say it's about balance, really. Like, we do blame the media, but then we don't have enough Asians working in the media, and there's no reason why they couldn't work there. there are opportunities. They are extremely difficult, but I feel like we are still a powerful community here. But again, it comes down to a lot of South Asians, I feel, from my personal experience, are quite naive in their understanding of just how powerful the media is. And again, they have a lack of concern overall about identity and representation. At the same time, that naivety is sort of abused by the media because they know that, well, actually, nothing's going to happen from it. So, I mean, in one sense, actually, it is the media who should be far more responsible and honest, but we all know that they're not going to do that. And even though they've started to from time to time, they're still not going to, take full responsibility. So I feel like we have that freedom now and the luxury to be taking that responsibility ourselves. Like I always say, a big part of my success is the fact that when I started Planet Parle, I just did a lot of it out of responsibility because I felt that, hold on, there's no one representing Gujaratis now. And through so many people supporting me in so many different ways, it's become what it's become, and it's still growing, and I'm still learning and still taking opportunities. But a big part of that's responsibility. Like a lot of people will be like, are you going to earn from this? Are you going to do this from this? And, is there, stability and safety in this type of work? And the answer to that is no, but like I'm doing it out of responsibility now. I'm doing it because if I don't do it, then what if someone else doesn't do it? So it's about responsibility. But I feel like we can all take a responsibility that we can commit to help out. Some people will help out in big ways, some people in small ways, but it's about that conscious decision. And at the end of the day, people will probably only care about what they want to achieve and what they want to do. And a lot of these media corporations aren't really concerned. So they are going to do the tick box thing from time to time, or a lot of the times. So we sort of have to get to work. That home isn't a location. Home might be clothing, home might be fragrance, home might be music, home might be people. So instead of looking at home as land and like, the house you live in, look at it much more like the clothes that you're wearing, or the food that you're making, or, the people that you're around. So it's sort of like take home and stop seeing it as like a nation. And I feel like that's helped me a lot because it's sort of like home tastes like my mum's cooking, and my mum's cooking is very sort of not Gujarati, Indian, not British, and not East African, but it's a blend of those three heritages. And when I eat that, I feel like, okay, now I feel like at home. But I could be eating that in another country, but as long as it's her recipe, that's what feels at home to me. So I've sort of deconstructed the traditional idea that home is, the house that you live in, and understood it that, you can feel at home even if you're not on solid land. You're out in the sea traveling, but it can still feel like home depending on how you interpret it. And that takes time. It's not something you're going to get straight away, because traditionally we've taught like, the motherland or the homeland. And I do feel like it's a responsibility. Like, I had two options when I started Planet Parle. I was really lucky, first of all, for videos to go viral. Like, it's the most thrilling thing to upload a video, go to bed, wake up the next day, and everyone is messaging you saying, they've watched your videos. And it's like, you're like, oh my God, like, this is what you want. This is what you want as a YouTuber. You want people to watch. You want those views coming in. That's the dream. The more people that watch you, the more you feel like, oh my God, like, people are enjoying me. They're like, listening to me or whatever. I'm doing something, I'm making a change in their life. Maybe they don't like the content, maybe it's annoyed them, but somehow I've triggered something. Maybe it's laughter, maybe it's emotions, maybe it's a past, whatever, but I've done something, I've impacted them. However, I didn't want to go down the route where I'm just churning out comedy videos and video, where I've just got this library of videos, but I'm not responsibly helping the generation underneath me or other people who want to be doing the same thing, or I'm not showing the nice bits as well. So yeah, I definitely feel like responsibility is a big thing. Like, I really didn't want to do that, and I knew that early on, that as much as I love taking the mick out of my culture and sort of pointing out what we're doing wrong, there was like a deep affection and love for my culture, and sort of to show both ends of that. What we really need is unpoliticized free thinking in the South Asian community here in the UK, because things will get politicized. We are instantly politicized just by what we look like. But that individual sort of opinion does matter. It can impact people. And it's important to be able to express that without feeling like, uh-oh, I can't say this, or this isn't the current trend, or, you know, right now everything's happening like this, so I will only be heard if I'm speaking, you know, streamline. I think that's really important, because there's not actually that many platforms, from what I understand, for South Asians, any age, any generation, any, you know, religion, or from any part of the subcontinent, to speak without having to sort of go down I fall under this wing or that wing, or of this religion or this religion. So I think that free thinking element is really difficult. I've been thinking about it a lot recently, because just feel like, okay, one thing, being a Hindu, if I wanted to sort of speak about being a Hindu, there's probably loads of Hindu organizations out there. But then working with them or whatever, does that mean now I have to sort of adhere to their common political ideology as well? But what if I don't want to do that, but I still want to represent? Yeah, it's important. It is important. And it's more important for us because we are a minority here in the UK. But equally, you need to give time to coming up as an individual. I always say to people, like, sometimes they get me on a radio show or you know, something to represent, and they're like, what are you? And I'm like, I'm Parle Patel, that's me.